And in this case, it was a break-in, so technically it was illegal, and then he covered it up and he got impeached. But the real reason why that became such a big scandal and the shit hit the fan was that this ONI guy, Woodard, had a source that he worked who had the actionable intelligence on what really happened, and there goes the president. And of course, you know, we had Ford, who was a part-term, time guy, and he had a CIA director, Bill Colby, who was a member of MAGIC. Bill Colby, I'm giving you like a 50-year history real quick. Is this good? You know, you need this, huh? Colby, and by the way, Nixon had a guy named Dick Helms, who did not want me to talk about this at all, and said as much to someone who is part of a group, and that woman is in this room today. But what ended up happening with Colby is that as he got older, he was very, very upset. And William Colby, CIA director, who was involved to an extent in the MAGIC operations, decided that it was really terrible what was happening to the country. And he's a very patriotic man. He was up there in years, and he decided to defect as a lone wolf, but an unacknowledged lone wolf. And this is why I'll never allow this again. So let me tell you what really happened to Bill Colby. Bill Colby, reached out to me through his best friend, a colonel who I will not name, is still living, and an elderly man, but a full-bird colonel who had been in MAGIC, this committee, that majority intelligence committee that oversees the UFO issue. And he wanted, Bill Colby wanted to bring forward the technologies, not the things that fly, but an energy technology based on these classified operations, and some seed money, about $50 million in, I guess, kind of gray area seed money, to my group so we could bring these technologies out and end the oil and global warming and the poverty and all of that. Now, the person who approached me, a member of my board, and this colonel, wouldn't say who the client was. They were going to set up a secret meeting. I said, I think it's safer if I know who he is. They said, why? I said, because I can put him into a security system. He says, what do you mean? I said, not knowing is dangerous for him. They said, no, he won't do it that way. So I said, okay. So I'm working full-time as a trauma doctor, emergency doctor, and we're setting that up. And the week before I'm going to meet with this former CIA director, they find him floating down the Potomac River, made to look like an accident, and he was assassinated. And it was tragic. And I said, I will never do this again. I felt terribly guilty. And his best friend came to my best friend's funeral, Sherry Adamak, who had been helping me for years and who was one of 3 of us who mysteriously got metastatic cancer the same month. Simeon, I think you knew Sherry. And this colonel came to her wake, and he just looked at me. He says, we can't look back. We have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, even though we both have had horrible losses. Yeah. So we did. We kept going. And, you know, when Bill Colby was killed, I thought at that point, well, his game is over. You know, from 94 until now, I was about to give up on everything. But anyway, very, very difficult emotionally and very difficult physically to carry this for, 25 years. But, I figured this is the pearl of great price. You don't throw this one back in to the water. I mean, this is huge. So we decided we would just continue marshaling our energies and go forward. But we knew that we couldn't do anything like that again. It had to be open. I mean, I had to know, and to the extent things could, none of this skullduggery, because the secrecy is their domain. If you go to the National Reconnaissance Office, the super secret spy agency that runs all the satellites, above their entrance it says, we own the night. You can Google it. And I always say, we need to own the light. we need to own the light of disclosure and the truth and bring this out. So I try to do things to the extent I can as fully as possible out in the open, while maintaining the confidences of those who are still living who asked me to do so. And that's why I'm giving you this much information today. The other thing to remember about how Colby's demise evolved was that he was going to make a run at one of the big central reasons for the secrecy, which I'll get into in a moment. And that's the technology. This is a big science and technology story. Because imagine bringing out a technology that would sit on this podium, that would run your house, pulling energy from what's been called the zero-point energy field, that never has to be rebooted for fuel. It's pulling it out of the fabric of space-time. And it's estimated that every cubic centimeter of space in this room has enough energy to run the United States for a year, if you can tap it. And it has been tapped. So at the root of interstellar transport, aside from the transdimensional and anti-gravity, is the energy source. And the energy source is this amazing electromagnetic flux field. In fact, the early man-made UFOs were called flux liners because it's pulling energy out of this infinite ocean, this infinite sea, as Tesla called it. Professor Dirac called it the Dirac Sea, but it was this infinite field of energy that is at the root of space-time, embedded within space-time. And so bringing out something like that would, of course, immediately make oil, gas, coal, ExxonMobil, cars, internal combustion engines, jet engines, rockets, diesel, ocean liner engine, everything you can think of that we use would be obsolete and would be retired very quickly. Now, what I just named is several $100 trillion in mineral assets and infrastructure, because we also wouldn't need a public utility. Every car and home would be self-sufficient unto itself. I mean, it is a whole new world. Now, we could have had that world before I was born, and we don't have it yet. And as a result, we've decamped in the Middle East with our hegemony, and now we're facing World War III. So there are consequences to this kind of secrecy, unintended, and some are intended. But the unintended consequences are really about blowing back on us hard right now, both physically, geophysically, environmentally, geopolitically, and militarily. It's a very dangerous thing to thwart the development of normal technologies to be used for peaceful purposes. Now, that's the big caveat. Use them for peaceful purposes. Now, eventually, one of the things that happened along the lines of this was, how do we keep all this secret? Well, wet works kill people. Compartmentalization, unacknowledged special access projects, nobody outside the project knows. A big one is ridicule. I have a document from 1950s where they talk about engaging Disney Studios, which had done a lot of the OSS propaganda films in World War II. And Walt Disney was an asset of the CIA. And believe it or not, I mean, everyone thinks of cartoons, but so they engaged Disney Studios to make Flying Saucer and Little Green Men films, ha ha ha. And it ridiculed the subject so that respectable people would say, well, you're a kook if you're dealing with UFOs and the ET issue. And that was done deliberately, and this was part of what I referred to in that earlier document, the psychological warfare value of the subject. How do you create the psychological nexus so that the subject becomes subject non grata? Like a persona non grata. It's a subject non grata. It's unwelcome. It has ridicule associated with it. And an Air Force major told me, who's one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, who was present when we shot and killed an ET on the tarmac at McGuire Field there in New Jersey. His testimony is quite riveting, if you've read the materials. And he was saying, look, really the way this has been kept secret more than anything is just sheer ridicule. Nobody wants to be laughed at. Everyone's concerned what their friends might think. Because, where's the tinfoil hat you're supposed to be wearing? So this ridicule got ramped up in 1953. And the psychological warfare programs. So by the time, we came on the stage, we're 50, 60 years into a hole of ridicule and denial and countermeasures and everything else that, how do you fix this? It's very difficult because most reporters and media people don't want to be ridiculed. Nor do scientific and people and professors and government folks. I mean, there's so many people in the Congress I've met with, very interested, know this is real. I'll say, will you hold a hearing on this? They go, oh, no. It'd be the end of my career. I'd be the laughing stock. I'd be Senator Moonbeam or Congressman, Tinfoil Hat or whatever. So that ridicule, which was ramped up in the 50s, has been very effective, incredibly effective. And that's one of the hard problems I've faced as well. Although, as a medical doctor, luckily I was known as a very good emergency doctor before I got on Larry King Live and started doing stuff like this. But if it had been the other way around, I probably would have never been hired. Really, so I was careful in my timing because I did have a family of 4 children to support. Luckily, they're all out of college now. So, now the next thing I want to, if the next document, if you move on from Marilyn Monroe's tragedy, and there will be time at the end of today for you to ask questions. I'm sure your mind must be swirling by now about a lot of things. And this is the next document is the Peterson Memo, Arlington Institute. So this is the meeting that never happened with me and the CIA director. Very interesting. Look at the date. 3rd of December, 1993. The meeting between me and the sitting CIA director was the 13th of December, 1993. And is that document up? And the CIA director, R. James Woolsey, who, when information about my meeting came out after he had left office, denied it ever happened. Luckily, I could call him in a flat-footed lie. I always tell people in Washington, how do you know these politicians and lawyers are lying? Their lips are moving. If their lips are moving, they're lying. I know it's a very cynical thing to say, but unfortunately very true. But this document, which I'm not going to go all the way through, but some of the information is very, very important. I talked to Woolsey this morning, and he suggested getting together, underline. Project Starlight that's referred to here was the coalition I put together before the Disclosure Project, which no one knew about, where I was trying to get the President Clinton to lead the disclosure on this. And it's a very interesting document because on the second page it says, remember, the most powerful people in the world will have a deep, compelling interest in our activities and will use everything in italics at their disposal to effect their objectives. Very threatening. And then he suggests that I get an encrypted portable phone because my kitchen doesn't have one. I mean, the whole thing is like such. Now here I am, of course, I'm like 30-some years old. I'm an emergency doctor, and I'm being asked to come up and brief the sitting CIA director because, and if you read this carefully, it states in there, he's made inquiries and no one's telling him anything. This is the sitting director of the CIA. This is the proof the meeting took place, and there is other proof. Now, what the hell is going on that a sitting CIA director doesn't know anything about the most top secret CIA project? Illegal, outrageous, unconstitutional, criminal. And when I found this out, now remember, this is 22 years ago almost, it was a shock to me. Because I was raised like most people. I thought, well, there's a president, there are all these spooks, and there's a chain of command, and it operates. I didn't know about unacknowledged special access projects. I certainly could not have imagined that the man who puts together the presidential daily briefing would be kept secret on stuff that I had collected unbelievable amounts of evidence for, the existence of UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, et cetera, and so on. But that was the case. And when I met with this man for nearly 3 hours, it became quite clear to me that it was not a prevarication. I really thought that he was saying that just as a way of blowing me off, or, not blowing me off, but sort of saying, I want to meet with you to find out what you know, but I actually do know, and I'm going to pretend like I don't know. No, this man, and my wife can attest to this, was shaken to his foundation. The cover story for the meeting was a dinner party, and they're in the D.C. area, which is typical. The wives were invited as cover. Terrible thing to say, but it's true. So my wife was there, I was there. The CI director and his wife, who was Chief Operating Officer of the National Academy of Sciences, was there, and my host, John Peterson, and his wife. Interestingly, she didn't know who was coming to dinner until that afternoon. He wouldn't tell her. And then she finds out, like 2 hours before we appear, there's this UFO expert and the CIA director and his wife coming for dinner. Can you imagine being that wife? That was I'm sure that night was an interesting conversation after we all left. But that's how these things are done. The real tragedy of it, though, is that if you have a breakdown in government this severe, those of you who are students of governance, where you can have a CIA director or senior members of the military who are being left out of something very important and which hundreds of billions of dollars per year are going into, then you have no government. So the deep national security state from 1950s until today has devolved into this sub rosa, unacknowledged, not international, transnational entity with representation in the UK, Canada, Australia, Brazil, China, Russia, former Soviet Union, which on this issue work together like this. It is not responsive to the body politic. It is not responsive to the heads of government or even the heads of committees and cabinet level people. There are some cabinet level people, however, who have known. I mentioned a few. There was a CIA director known as George H.W. Bush, and the CIA headquarters is now named after him. He was a member and is a member of MAGIC. But then there are others like Woolsey who wouldn't be told anything. Some presidents have been given a little information, and some have been told nothing. Why? Well, here's how it works. It took me a long time to figure out something very simple. I call this a soul biopsy, because doctors are talking about biopsies, but it's a psychological analysis. So let's say this gentleman is the incoming director of the CIA. The outgoing director of the CIA is me. As incoming director of the CIA, they've taken your life apart, and they know what your values are. If your values are that you would not go along with an illegal, criminal, unconstitutional effort and engage in assassinations that were illegal and other things, they will never tell you about this. And even if you're the president that's incoming, this is what happened to Jimmy Carter, and I know this for a fact. Jimmy Carter got elected, and the outgoing CIA director was, guess who? George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush, when he was called in and they had the transition meeting for between November and January when they have the transition and they're standing up the new cabinet, was asked personally, face-to-face, by Jimmy Carter, and I met with someone who was there, about the UFO issue. And Bush said, I'm not going to tell you, in a very derisive way, about that. Go see if you can get it from the Congressional Research Service, literally. brushed him off. And Carter was stunned, because Carter had had a UFO sighting when he was governor of Georgia. I have his report form that he filed officially, signed Jimmy Carter. He ran in 1976 on ending UFO secrecy, actually. So he put together a White House study on UFOs, which we have Disclosure Project witnesses that attest thereto, and they were reaching out to Stanford Research International to do SRI, to do the study for them, because they couldn't get anything from outgoing CIA Director Bush. And that entity, SRI, had some people come in and threaten them and said, basically, if you want to receive any more contracts from the Department of Defense or the US government, you will refuse to do this study for the White House. We have that as an affidavit signed from someone involved. So now, this is very extraordinary, but we have legal documents that prove it. So Carter was boxed out of this. And not long ago, he was at a signing ceremony, signing guitars in Spain to raise money for the Carter Center a few years ago. And a very well-known, I think his name's John Williams, well-known classical guitarist who's on our team, was there and said, you know, at dinner, someone asked Carter, what was it like to be the most powerful man in the world? And President Carter said, I don't think I was that man. And everyone just thought he was joking. And he said, well, there are certain things I wasn't allowed to know about. And someone very, in a ridiculing way, said, ha, 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 what, like UFOs? And President Carter said, yes, that and more, referring to these energy and technology things. And so Carter wasn't joking, and it is true that he did not get access the whole time he was president, because he would have ended the secrecy, and they knew it. It's also why he was a one-term president. Now we had after him Ronald Reagan, or Ray-Gun, as I call him, R-A-Y. So a colonel who reached out to me was one of the guys who putting together the SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. And he actually met with Carter and Reagan. Carter was a hard sell, Reagan was a soft sell on the billions to go into Star Wars. Now, the way it worked is that the Star Wars was always a cover story for targeting in space interstellar vehicles using these scalar weapons, not lasers, not if it's at the speed of light, it's not fast enough. Everything important is faster than the speed of light. And so what happened is that he, at that point, got convinced. They sent just the right people in to convince Reagan that there was an existential alien threat. Basically what Wernher von Braun warned on his deathbed about, which we'll get to in a moment. And so Reagan bought into it. That's why you can Google this. At the UN, he said, wouldn't our job of uniting the world be easier if we could unite against a common alien threat? I'm paraphrasing, but you can look this up. Actually, Bill Clinton recently said that on Jimmy Kimmel, something very similar. The reason that happens is because there is a prevailing need for people who are in certain positions to be given what is, I call, targeted and tailor-made disinformation. Information that is geared towards scaring the hell out of them so they go along with the agenda of militarism as opposed to peaceful contact with these civilizations. And it's not hard to do if you have a certain orientation, if you have a certain mindset based on fear, xenophobia, us versus them, that whole mindset. So that's really the criteria. Whether someone is pulled in the loop of this secrecy in government or not has to do with what their values are, what their psychological profile is, whether they will go along with the agenda of secrecy. If they will not go along with the agenda of secrecy, they're not going to tell you anything. I don't care if you are the President of the United States or the CIA Director or the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But there have been people who do know in those same positions. Why? Because they were willing to go along with this chicanery. Now, if the next document you can put up, it's just a partial list of the sort of VIPs and government official I briefed. This goes 3 pages long. It's 50, 60, 70, and this is just a few of them. Every single one of these people, without exception, and you can scroll down through them and just flip through. I'm not going to go through them all. We don't have time. This is a lot of work, having private meetings with this many people. Every single one of these people, from Senator Claiborne Pell to the CIA director, to the head of intelligence for the Joint Staff, to the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the biggest intelligence gathering entity in the Pentagon, every single one of these people wanted to know but had been denied access to these unacknowledged special access projects. Every single one of them. That is the proof we have. If we ever had to go to court to prove that the operation is illegal. And these people, the ones still living, would be subpoenaed. Because, believe me, and I have more, one of them that you see on page 2 here is Lord Hill Norton. And if you go to this next document, this is a 5-star admiral. How many people have heard of Lord Hill Norton? He's actually a great guy. He passed away not long ago. I don't mind sharing these couple letters. I have a whole file with him. He asked me to come to his estate in England and brief him back in, I believe it was 1990s sometime. And he was a 5-star admiral, what they used to call Sea Lord. And Lord Hill Norton, is that the one? Is that the right one? Yeah. He had found out through other sources that UFOs were real and that there was a big operation in the UK that was this transnational, deep national security state working with the British. But he was head of the Ministry of Defense, and as such was head of MI5 and MI6. He was also head of the military committee for NATO. He had no knowledge of these projects the entire time he was in government. And when I met with him at his cottage, and you know what's kind of cute about it, at the second document, if you go to the next one, he says, I thoroughly enjoyed our talk when you came in August. This was in August of, I guess it was 1995. And I am grateful to you for your time. I read all the materials you left me, and I intend to read it all again. I also shared it with Countess Murray, who shares our interest. I have an idea you may have met her some time ago. I meet a lot of folks. I find your latest brief on the national security implications of the UFO subjects very clear and very convincing, and it goes on. It's a beautiful letter, and things he was going to do with the European Parliament and whatnot. He died not being able to accomplish as much as he wanted to with the British government because I had to explain to him why he never knew anything about this. And it's a very hard thing to sit with someone like a CIA director or someone like this, who's one of the most powerful people in the military and intelligence field in the world, and tell them, you just were not in the loop. And he basically said to me, well, why didn't they tell me? And he was a little hurt and kind of petulant. And I said, sir, I'm going to answer your question with a question. What would you have done if you'd found out there was a transnational entity, unacknowledged, running unconstitutionally in your country and mine, engaging in assassinations, keeping from the planet technologies that would save the earth from environmental destruction and eliminate poverty within a generation? And that they are using these technologies to try to provoke, as agents provocateurs, an interstellar conflict and World War III, and that they were completely off the reservation without any controls from the chief executive or the legitimate governments of the world. And he hopped up and down. He's this little guy with piercing blue. He says, I wouldn't have stood for a bloody minute. I said, well, that's why they didn't tell you. He says, what do you mean? He thought I was being impertinent. I said, because they knew you wouldn't go along with that agenda. Therefore, you are out of the loop. That's how it works. It's that simple.